with the specific evidence from the text. You may also use the outside information as long as you source it and it's credible. Make sure to ask questions from the other teams if they were not clear about something. Also connect the 2 points, synthesizes, and everyone has to participate. So now we move on to the Socratic seminar rules. One representative from each team presents at a time, right? In an inner circle. As soon as the representative makes at least 2 contributions, then you may tap in. So they have to contribute at least 2 things, right? For the coaches, you could pass the notes. You may not talk or communicate with your team member inside the circle. And only the person holding the talking piece speaks, right? So we respect one another and we always use the appropriate language. So you may send in your representatives. Make sure you decide who is the scorer and who is the coach on your team. Okay, so we have the coach, we have the scorer, and you must have the note taker as well to give 1 praise and 1 polish to your team member.
And the scores.
Are we ready? Make sure we're paying attention. We're turned in. Ricky, look yourself a little bit, please. Yana and Ashley, please make sure that we're paying attention. We're ready? We all decided who's going to be the scorer, the coach, and the note taker? Yes? Okay, excellent. So, round 1. Bible. Read the statement, please.
How effective was the U.S. foreign policy of containment? We agree with the fact that the U.S. foreign policy of containment was effective because it was a way for the United States to not be outnumbered by communistic countries and also for communism not to spread. The Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan were ways of the U.S. to help contain communism. In Document 1, it states that when forces of liberation entered Greece, they found that the retreating Germans had destroyed virtually all the railways, roads, port facilities, communications, and merchant marines. In the next paragraph, it also states that Greece is in desperate need of financial and economic assistance to enable it to resume purchases of food, clothing, fuel, and seeds. It basically says that the policy was needed in order for these countries to move on with their lives. And in the last paragraph, it states that the Greek army is small and poorly equipped. It needs supplies and equipment if it is to restore authority of the government throughout Greek territory. Greece must have assistance if it is to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. The United States must supply this assistance.
The U.S. foreign policy of containment was very effective. The Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan both provided aid for European nations. In Document 1, it states American people and Congress shouldn't turn a deaf ear to the appeal of the Greek government. Greece is not a rich country. They lack of sufficient natural resources and has always forced the Greece people to work hard. In Document 5, it states that in 1947, U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a plan to rebuild European economies by providing $13 billion in food, machines, money to any European country that needed it. For those countries that accepted the aid, the plan was very successful. In Document 5, the chart shows the aid received by European countries through the plan. Great Britain received 26 million, France received 45 million, and Greece received 515 million, and Turkey received 153 million. The European nations were in the ruins. They experienced a series of cold, harsh winters and they lacked the food and economic upheaval. and Marshall Plan gave them aid to survive. In the excerpt from the U.S. Secretary of State Marshall's speech, he states, "Our policy is directed against hunger, poverty, desperation, and chaos."
I agree with Mohammed and Bayo said. We believe that the U.S. foreign policy of containment was very successful. It had prevented communism from spreading around the world. One example of the U.S. foreign policy of containment is the Truman Doctrine. It prevented communism in Greece and Turkey by giving them financial aid. Another example is the Marshall Plan. It gave European countries financial aid to prevent Soviet communism. In Document 1, it states that one primary objective of the foreign policy of the United States is the creation of conditions in which we and other nations will be able to work out a way of life. And on the other page, President Truman in his speech states that we must take immediate action and resolute action. I therefore ask the Congress to provide authority for assistance to Greece and Turkey in the amount of $400 million for the period ending June 30th, 1948. In requesting these funds, I take into consideration the maximum amount of relief assistance which requires these funds. In addition to funds, I ask Congress to authorize the detail of American civilian and military personnel to Greece and Turkey to assist the tasks of reconstruction and for the purpose of supervising the use of such financial and material assistance. This basically states that the Truman Doctrine was a policy that stated that the U.S. would help Greece and Turkey economically to stop them from falling under Soviet control.
I agree with all of you. Therefore, we agree with the statement. The U.S. foreign policy of containment was effective as it prevented communist Soviet Union to expand and take over the democratic nations. According to the Document 1, Truman Doctrine speech delivered by President Truman to Congress on March 12, 1947, the very existence of the Greek state is today threatened by the terrorist activities of several thousand armed men, led by communists, who defy the government's authority at a number of points, particularly along the northern boundaries. It also states that Greece must have assistance if it's to become a self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. The United States must supply this assistance. We have already extended to Greece contingent types of relief and economic aid, but these are inadequate. There is no other country to which democratic Greece can turn. No other nation is willing and able to provide the necessary support for a democratic Greek nation, meaning that Greece's government and people are threatened by the communists, and in order to preserve the democracy in Greece, the United States must provide assistance, as there is no other country who will provide necessary support for a democratic Greek government. The document 1 further states, we shall not realize our objectives, however, unless we are willing to help free peoples to maintain their free institutions and their national integrity against aggressive movements that seek to impose upon them totalitarian regimes. There is no more than a frank recognition that totalitarian regimes imposed upon free peoples by direct or indirect aggression undermine the foundations of international peace and hence the security of the United States. Meaning we will realize our objectives unless we are helping the free people to maintain the free way of life against the communist aggression. If communists take over the free people, the international peace and the security of the United States would be in danger.
Excellent. Last person.
I want to say that I agree with all the persons in this conversation, as I also agree that the U.S. was effective in the containment of communism. As said in Document 1, Greece and Turkey were affected by the Soviet Union, and the Greek state is today threatened by terrorist activities of several thousand armed men led by communists, which meant that it could not help itself. As it also states in Document 1 that the Greek army is small and poorly equipped. It needs supplies and equipment if it is to restore authority of the government throughout Greek territory. Greece must have assistance if it is to become self-supporting and self-respecting democracy. The United States must supply this assistance, which means that Greece is in dire need of help from the Soviet Union. In addition, in document number 5, the Marshall Plan, you can see a graph. The you can see a document which shows that all the allied nations, nations that were powered by the U.S., have received financial aid, and that Greece and Turkey were one of the main contestants.
Okay, excellent. So go back to your groups for one praise and one polish. For the people that were taking the notes, give your teammate one praise, one polish. Thank you.
After Jesse.
Justin's everything.
One praise, one polish. Make sure you also look at your score to see how to gain more points.
That's why you have to go first. You have to be one of the first ones.
No, only us. Not everybody.
Okay.
Who's this for?
That's three. That's three.
That's three? That's
Yeah,
for three.
that's mine.
Who's number 2?
Just read the yellow part.
That's for number 3 or 2.
Three.
This one? How you score now?
One praise, one polish for
I
Jocelyn.
still haven't finished scoring.
What's the praise?
I still haven't finished.
Tell that to Jocelyn.
You didn't have
What
a
does she need to
follow-up
work on?
Wait, let me score.
All right, 10 seconds before you send your next representative in.
Which one are you doing?
All right, next representative, let's go. All right, scorers, make sure you score on the following page. One per round. And my note takers are taking notes so they can provide feedback when the representative returns. So, Ashley can start off this one. Please read the statement or question.
Why was the war in Vietnam seen unjust by many Americans? The war in Vietnam was seen unjust by many Americans because civilians were killed excessively and unjustly. In document 3, by Ron Ridenhour, who is a reliable source because he was a respected investigative journalist and he won George Polk Award for investigative journalism. It states that any villagers who ran from Charlie's company were stopped by the encircling companies, and I asked Butch several times if all the people were killed. He said that he thought they were men, women, and children. He recalled seeing a small boy, about 3 or 4 years old, standing by the trail with a gunshot wound in one arm. It was so bad, Groover said that one of the men in his squad shot himself in the foot in order to be medevaced out of the area so that he would not have to participate in the slaughter. Although he had not seen it, Groover had been told by people he considered trustworthy that one of the company's officers, Second Lieutenant Callie, had rounded up several groups of villagers. According to the story, Callie then machine-gunned each group. Groover estimated that the population of the village had been 300 to 400 people and that very few, if any, escaped. And then he asked the other people that were supposedly in this group, and he said instead of contradicting Butch's Groover's story, they corroborated it, which means they added to it, and they said it was true, and they added some tasty tidbits of information of their own. Terry and Doherty had been in the same squad, and their platoon was the 3rd platoon of C's company to pass through the village. Most of the people they came to were already dead. Those that weren't were sought out and shot. The platoon left nothing alive, neither livestock nor people.
Well, actually, I do very agree with you. The war in Vietnam was seen as unjust or very unnecessary by many Americans because North Vietnam, also known as the Communists, was victorious over South Vietnam, also known as democracy, and the Allied forces. Many Americans were affected by the war, for so many died and many more were wounded. Also during the war, many civilians were raped and killed. According to Maya Lea massacre, it was the Vietnam War mass murder of between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians in South Vietnam on March 16, 1968, which was committed by the U.S. Army soldiers. This was very unnecessary because if they're going into the war against civilians, there's no need to shoot or kill or even rape these young women or men because it was unnecessary. In document 3 by Rod Rittenhauer, it says the other two companies that made up the task force coordinated of the village so that Charlie Company could move through the destroy and structures and kill the inhabitants, basically kill the civilians. Any villagers who ran from Charlie Company were stopped by in-circulating companies. I mean, either way, they were going to get killed. And they had rounded up several group of villagers, each by consisting of a minimum of 20 persons of both sexes and all ages. So, yeah.
I agree with Josh and Ashley because the Vietnam War was seen as unjust by many Americans. Many Americans thought that the Vietnam War was unnecessary because of all the innocent civilians that were killed. There were also villages being burned down that had nothing to do with the Vietnam War by America. There were also women being raped and killed. As it states in debate.org, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. violated an international law called the Geneva Conventions. As it also states in debate.org, the Vietnam War got over 38,000 American military personnel killed. There was also a chemical mixture formed called Agent Orange, which destroyed many crops and spread many diseases. There was also the Ho Minh Trail, which was a trail that connected South Vietnam and North Vietnam, which wasn't in Vietnam itself. It was in Laos and Cambodia. So the U.S. were also bombing innocent countries.
I agree with Ashley, Josh, and Mohammed that the Vietnam War was unjust because so many American soldiers lost their lives to a war that had no win and no lose. Lives were basically wasted and there was no progress. In document 3, a letter from Ron Rittenhauer regarding the My Lai massacre in 1969, it states that, according to the story, Cali then machine-gunned each group. Gruber estimated that the population of the village had been 300 to 400 people and that very few, if any, escaped. After hearing this account, I could not quite accept it. Somehow, I just couldn't believe that not only had so many young American men participated in such an act of barbarism, but that their officers had ordered it. Basically, this former soldier is agreeing with other Americans that doing this to civilians that had nothing to do with the war was very unjust and it was unreasonable. Also, in document 3, it states that he had been a witness to Cali's gunning down at least 3 separate groups of villagers. It was terrible. They were slaughtering villagers like so many sheep, which is basically saying that this happened more than once in Vietnam. And lastly, it states that I remain irrevocably persuaded that if you and I do truly believe in principles of justice and the equality of every man, however humble, before the law, that form the very backbone that this country is founded on, then we must press forward a widespread and public investigation of this matter with all our combined efforts. Basically saying that an American himself is contradicting what the United States is doing and doesn't agree with it.
1 minute.
I agree with Bio and everybody else. Americans saw the Vietnam War as unjust because they saw that we weren't technically winning the war. In document 4, in a letter from Eisenhower to, I don't know how to pronounce the name, but it said Vietnam has caused grave concern regarding the future of the country temporarily divided by an artificial military grouping, weakened by a long, exhausting war and faced with enemies without and by their subversive collaborators within. This quote means that Vietnam's military would be hurt after the war, and that it is unjust that two parts of the same country are at war. Also, in document 3, it states, Americans also thought that the war was unjust because many people were getting killed that weren't even part of the war. In document 3, it states that any villagers who ran from charge companies were stopped by their encircling companies. And Von Riedenauer asked Bush several times if all people were killed. The man answered, he said that they were men, women, and children. He recalled seeing a small boy about 3 or 4 years old, standing by the trail with a gunshot and a wound in one arm. He was just staring around himself in shock and disbelief at what he saw. He didn't understand. He didn't believe what was happening. Then the captain's radio operator just put a burst of M16 fire.
All right, we have to move on to the next one. So go back to your groups. Give them one praise, one polish, please. One praise, one polish. Remember, you also earn points for inviting people in that haven't said that much. Make sure you use a strategy on how to earn more points based on the rubric. You can.
How about you say you talk first and I'm gonna tap you out.
I want to hear praise and polish.
So what you want to say?
You better talk fast. I mean, I said talk fast. Talk first. What do she unlined it. Like I have this. Like read this part called for sacrifice. I'm try to like read over here. I don't know if it would work, but like kind of felt like when you see it from this, like from here all the way up to this paragraph. Because that's what it talks about. Called for sacrifice. Just read it. No, just read it. It's a part.
So how much more documents we actually have? Like more questions?
So South to talk first, and then I'm gonna tap you out, boy.
Okay, send your next representative in, please.
What is this, number 2? Number 3 already.
Oh yeah? Oh my gosh, you don't know Yahoo?
Nah. The history channel.
Who has the talking, please? No. Who we have?
Can I start off?
Oh, you do go first. Okay, so round 3. Make sure the scores are flipped on the next page. Mark it off round 3. Make sure my coaches are supporting their representatives. And please be sure the person that's in charge of praise and polish is taking notes. Okay? Make sure you're taking notes. Okay, Mark is going to start off this round. Please read the statement.
Alright, so it has thing 3. The Soviet Union has to be stopped at all costs. I personally agree with this claim because as said in document 7, document 6, the Soviet Union was starting the space race and we were going to get in the competition. And so during the period that followed Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2, many people accused the Eisenhower administration of letting the Soviet Union be the best of the United States, which meant that the Soviet Union would ultimately get better than the US. And that's not something that the US would want to. On the other note, we have document 7, which states a chart numbering all the nuclear weapons that both the USSR and the US had, which also all increased with time and had led to a state of crisis. And ultimately, as a source, we have the movie 13 Days Later, which showed the Cuban Missile Crisis, how it posed a threat to the United States. It was stationed directly into the Cuba and could attack us at any given time, which meant that the United States, the USSR could attack the United States at any given time. We could just go into nuclear warfare.
I agree with Mark. And also with the statement, the USSR was building missiles and doing other things that threatened the US So the U.S. had an arms race and a space race against the Soviets. In document 6, it states, the combination of technological and scientific advance, political competition with the Soviet Union, and changes in popular opinion about spaceflight came together in a very specific way in the 1950s to affect public policy in favor of an aggressive space program. Also, in document 7, it states, the arms race was when the U.S. and the Soviet Union built as many weapons as possible so that one superpower had the most. And with this, the U.S. wanted to be more powerful than the Soviet Union, so they would be more advanced and they would have the most world power.
I agree with social and Marxist. The Soviet Union has to be stopped at all costs because when the missiles are being shot, they would cause danger to the peace side of the United States. The U.S. was no longer the only country with nuclear weapons. In document 7, it shows how much more nuclear weapons the USSR had in the U.S., which means they will be sending missiles to Cuba affecting the United States.
I agree with Safa. The Soviet Union had to be stopped at all costs. The Soviet leader and President John F. Kennedy had a meeting. The Soviet leader threatened that he would cut off Allied access to Berlin. The U.S. said that they would keep peace between each other. 2 months later, the Soviet leader built the Berlin Wall. Because of this, Kennedy increased its military. Soviet resumed nuclear testing, and so did America. In 1961, the Soviet Union put nuclear missiles in Cuba to deaden any future invasion. President Kennedy proposed to Congress today bold and expensive new measures to rocket a man to the moon, to expand non-nuclear military strength, and to increase foreign policy aid. As it states in document 6, the poem, "O little Sputnik flying high with maiden Moscow beep, you tell the world it's calmy sky and Uncle Sam's asleep. You say on fairway and on rough, the Kremlin knows it all. We hope our girlfriend knows enough to get us on the ball." This, according to the poem, is saying how the U.S. was saying that the time the Soviet Union beat them to space. However, this only makes them stronger and also makes them work harder.
I agree with all of you. The Soviet Union had to be stopped at all costs. They went from being a regular country to a world power in just a split second. The Soviet Union technology was just starting to advance. The USSR now had nuclear bombs. The USA feared that the use of these weapons. The Soviet Union had gained a lot of power. They battled for freedom, and the USSR almost 15,000 more weapons than the US, nuclear bombs. In document 6, it states, one of Johnson's aides, George E. Reedy, summarized the feelings of many Americans. The simple fact is that we can no longer consider the Russians to be behind us in technology. It took them almost 4 years to catch up to us in our atomic bombs, and 9 months to catch up to our hydrogen bombs. Now we are trying to catch up to their satellite. Russia had to be stopped at all costs. In document 7, it states, on this graph, it says that Russia basically were 15,000 ahead. USA was at 30,000 nuclear bombs, and Russia was at 45,000. The USSR had higher rates of nuclear weapons, which brought fear to many people of the USA because they didn't know what Russia was going to do, when they were going to do it. They just was very confused and scared at this time, so the USA needed Russia to be stopped.
I agree with everyone that has spoken so far, and I would also like to add that they also wanted to stop the spread of communism, and they feared that if the Soviet Union spread their ideas of communism around Eastern Europe, that the domino effect would happen and that everyone in Eastern Europe would become a communist country. And they also feared that if the Soviet dropped one of their nuclear weapons, then a whole worldwide war would start, and they also feared for World War III.
I agree with all of you that Soviet Union had to be stopped at all costs because Soviet Union was attempting to expand and spread communism and was advancing in technology and weapons which endanger American lives. According to document 6, the American response to Sputnik by Roger D. Lonius, the combination of technological and scientific advance, political competition with the Soviet Union and changes in popular opinion about spaceflight came together in a very specific way in the 1950s to reflect the public policy in favor of an aggressive space program, meaning the increasing competition with the Soviet Union in the fields of technology, science and politics had a great significant impact on the public as public turned against Soviet Union and supported the space race. It further states the Sputnik crisis reinforced for many people the popular conception that Eisenhower was a smiling incompetent. It was another instance of do-nothing, golf-playing president mismanaging events. G. Menon Williams, the Democratic governor of Michigan, even wrote a poem about it. The public, meaning that public and people in Eisenhower administration believe that Eisenhower is doing nothing while Soviet Union is becoming more advanced day by day, and thus Williams wrote the poem to show that Soviet Union is flying high whilst United States is sleeping. The document further states the simple fact is that, as according to George E. Reilly, the simple fact is that we can no longer consider the Russians to be behind us in technology. It took them 4 years to catch up to our atomic bomb and 9 months to catch up our hydrogen bomb. Now we are trying to catch up to the satellite. He's describing how Soviet Union is achieving technological superiority over United States, and US must take an action to be the superior nation in the world. He's also summarizing the feelings of many Americans by saying that US need to catch up with the competition of space race, as Soviet Union is inventing themselves very faster to compete US. According to document 7, the graph shows that the US has had more intercontinental ballistic missiles. That US is a major threat to the security of United States and the peace of the world. Thus, United States have to catch up with an arms race and stop Soviet Union in order to preserve the democratic principles and maintain the peace of the world.
All right, excellent. So go back to your groups. One praise, one polish. One praise, one polish. Excellent, planes.
You was nervous?
Yes.
You going next? Okay. Okay. So you got the score. Okay, so you will be the coach supporting him. You taking notes on praise and polish? Good? Yes. Each one of these things are 2 points or 1 point, so you have to do a tally of which one they got.
This was Bob.
Okay, one praise, one polish.
Give it to me first.
Let's hear it. No, somebody else needs to give you the reflections. Whoever was the note taker. It looks like Ruben was the note taker.
Where are you writing out?
So one praise, one polish.
I like the information that Mark gave, but he should try to add more to it. Keep getting the ball more often.
Right?
Pass for the ball more often.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, send in your next representative.
No.
Let Melissa.
Voice is heard. I have information. Please.
He has love information. Can you tap him in the middle?
If you don't talk,
Who has the talking piece? Thank you. Okay, we'll have Ricky begin. Read the statement, please.
The question. The question. Number 4 is sacrifice had to be made to preserve the American principles and democracy of capitalism. I agree with this because America had made some sacrifices like the Marshall Plan, Truman, I don't know how to pronounce it. Doctrine, and also made sacrifices in America itself. Now, as in document 1 from the source expert from the Truman document speech, he says that I therefore ask the Congress to provide authority for assistance to Greek and Turkey in amount of $400 million for the period ending June 30th, 1948. And requesting these funds, I have taken into consideration the maximum amount of relief assistance which will be furnished to Greek out of $35 million, which I recently request that the Congress authorize for the prevention of starvation and suffering in the countries disaster or war. In additional funds, I ask Congress to authorize the details of American civilians and military personnel to Greek and Turkey. And at the request of those countries to assist the task of reconstruction and for the purpose of supervising the use of such financial and material assistance as may be furnished. And also, as in document 5, the Marshall Plan, it says that in 1947, U.S. Secretary of State George Marshall proposed a plan to rebuild Europe economically by providing $13 billion in food, machines, and money to any European country that needed it. For those countries that accepted the aid, the plan was very successful. And it also shows you a chart, the countries that they helped and they provided money for. But actually, the countries that they actually said they would help, they actually gave allies more money that they usually give the other countries that they actually said they would help. And actually, as in document 9, it shows that America may sacrifice in its own country by saying, but it is not a standstill budget, for America cannot afford to stand still. Our population is growing and our economy is more complex. Our people needs are expanding. But by closing down, I don't know how to pronounce the word, Miss King. And by closing down, it's standing by saying let's under programs. By cutting back where cutting back seems to be wise, by extending $1 worth for $1 spent, I'm able to recommend in this reduced budget the most federal support in history for education, for health, and for retiring the unemployment, and for helping the economy and the physical handicap.
So what does that mean, Ricky? What did the United States have to do in order to come up with all that money?
They had to cut back schools. Instead of unemployment, they actually did it for retirement, and they had to cut back health programs and education.
So they had to make a lot of cutbacks in the United States. Excellent. Pass it over to somebody. Okay, great. Go ahead.
I agree with what you said. Sacrifices had to be made for stopping communism. New taxes and increased in old taxes to finance the new programs. Kennedy stated that the nation will also exercise self-restraint against increasing wages or prices or overproducing certain crops, paying higher postal rates, higher payrolls, and higher teacher salaries. And in document 8, the 4th paragraph, it says that Kennedy said sacrifices would be required for the American people in the battle for freedom. The nation's greatest asset, he said, is the willingness of his people to pay a price for these programs, to accept a long struggle and to share their resources with less fortunate people. He expressed confidence that the nation will also exercise self-restraint against decreasing wages or prices or overproducing certain crops. He also goes on to say that the president said that the problems of survival for some of the nation's allies were complicated, where conditions of social injustice and economic chaos were allowed to fester and to invite communist subversion. It would be the nation's aim, he said, to help them solve each economic problem as well as to provide them with military assistance. And in his famous quote, he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," which is saying that we need to sacrifice ourselves to make it better as a unit.
I have to disagree with you because preserving the democracy does not mean every sacrifice, because the military did kill a lot of civilians, and preserving the democracy does not necessarily mean killing civilians. And as in document 5, there was a first-hand account of a gunning down of at least 3 separate groups of villagers. And the account, it states it was terrible. They were slaughtering villages like so many sheep. Callie's men were dragging people out of bunkers, hooches, and putting them together in a group. People were grouped with men, women, and children of all ages, and as soon as he felt that the group was big enough, Cali ordered M60 set up and killed the people. This was unnecessary because many civilian lives were lost, and this is not worth the sacrifice for a war that was just there to preserve communism.
I agree. I disagree with what Josh said. We agree with the statement that sacrifices had to be made to preserve the American principles of democracy and capitalism, because our way of life would have been destroyed. If not, communism would have taken over the world, and sacrifices needed to be made to preserve those who fought for our way of life. As stated in Document 8, Kennedy said that sacrifices would be required of the American people in the battle of freedom. And the nation's greatest asset is the willingness of his people to pay the price for these programs, to accept the long struggle and to share the resources with less fortunate people. He expressed confidence that the nation would also exercise self-restraint against increased wages or prices over overproduction of certain crops, like Ruben stated. This basically just means that the people had to support our country, even if it meant like slight discomfort for them, because if not, then communism would have taken over the world. And without sacrifices, we wouldn't have the power to solve economic problems and assist other countries towards freedom, which was the American goal from the beginning.
One last person, please.
Okay, I disagree with Ellen and Ruben, and I agree with Josh, because yes, the war helped stop the spread of communism to the United States and preserved our way of life, but was the life of Americans really worth it? I mean, like, when we preserved the Union, we didn't want Americans to die ourselves, so why would we want them to go and die off in another country? That wasn't even worth it. It states in Document 8 that although he did not ask new or increased taxes now to finance the new programs, Kennedy said that sacrifices would be made of the American people in battle for freedom. And the sacrifices that were made, basically, like, soldiers were killing each other and stuff like that. Even though it was by accident, they were still killing each other, and they were killing other civilians, as Josh stated, that had nothing to do with our way of life. And also, it says that he answered in some detail a question often asked of him since his inaugural proposed the challenge to Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which basically it drove Americans to volunteer in the war. However, a lot of Americans, when they realized what was going on, they didn't want any part of it, which is why there were riots and things in colleges and all parts of America.
All right, excellent. So, please go back to your groups. The round 5 you guys have work to do on your own, and you have the exit slip, which is the reflection about today's seminar. So, I asked you, what was the most intriguing claim you heard today and why? So, on your graphic organizers that I will be collecting, on the bottom, please write down what was the most intriguing claim that you heard today, and please give me the reason why. And be sure to put everything back into the folders. Nice and